What's going on, guys? It's Justin here with Summit Racing, and we have Andrew Markell with Tomorrow's Technician, and we're here for another live stream. And today we have a really fun subject. It's custom wheel and tire packages and TPMS sensors. It's going to be everything you guys need to know and more, and probably some facts you guys don't even want to know. But, you know, me and Andrew like to give those to you guys. So what's going on, Andrew?
Nothing much. I mean, TPMS it's mandatory. Anything
it's
2008 or newer.
Yeah, it's it's modern technology, and it's something that we all kind of complain about sometimes when you have that little tire light on the dash. But it lets you know that you have a leaky tire, and that's important because it's the last thing you want to do is be driving, cruising down the highway, and then you start to hear that dreaded flat tire thud, and it really rains on your parade. So this gives you a little a preemptive to that.
And just as a reminder to our audience, keep your comments and questions going on YouTube and then also on Facebook. If you could do that for us, and we'll answer them as they occur to us and they come up in the stream here. But let's talk about tires. A load rating for a tire. What does that really mean?
So a load rating in a tire is, it's all tires are different, and it all depends on carcass design. So essentially I would say the lower the letter goes on a tire, the higher its load rating is. So, a lot of like your truck, large trucks and stuff all use an E-rated tire. That's kind of like the staple there. And, that has to do with, between load ratings, plies, there's a lot going on. But, lower the letter in the alphabet, the higher the weight rating of that tire is.
And how does that load rating affect inflation?
So, with a higher low rated tire, it's going to have a thicker carcass and stuff like that. So the thing's going to probably require a larger PSI. So what a regular passenger car tire with a low load rating might take 25 to 35 PSI. A back of factory tire on say a 2019 Dodge 2500 is 80 PSI. So, but it's two different things. A passenger car, you're not pulling massive amounts of weight or hauling things in the bed. So the rule of thumb is the larger the vehicle is, like a 1-ton pickup truck, the higher load rating it's going to be, and the more PSI those tires are going to require.
So let's bring this to the custom wheel and tire package equation here. I know a lot of guys do bench racing, and they look through the catalog for Summit Racing. They go online, they look at all the specs, and they start speccing out a wheel and tire package for a vehicle. What should they be aware of when they're shopping?
So one of the big things you're going to want to look at is, a lot of guys like to put a brand new set of wheels and tires on your pickup truck, make it more look like a pickup truck, get yourself some mud terrains, that kind of deal. But you need to think about what you're doing with your truck. Are you just driving this thing on the road? You're not going to haul a bunch of weight and that kind of deal. You can run a larger wheel with a thinner sidewall and maybe not so aggressive. And, if you're not pulling a bunch of weight in the truck and it's going to be a daily driver, then you can get by with a lower load rated tire. Sorry, I had a little jumble there, guys. But anyway, so you could get by with a lower tire rating. Now, if you're going to be using your truck all the time, hauling a bunch of weight, your load rating is going to be very important because, you're going to want a tire that's rated for what you're planning on using your truck for. So and that's the thing is, if you take a lower rate weighted tire, you go, put a big gooseneck on it, throw a bunch of weight on it, go cruising down the road. Not only is it not safe and the truck's going to drive, the driving characteristics of the truck are going to be severely affected, but you're going to wear those tires out really fast.
And, this is information here in regards to, I'm going to hold that up so they can get that on camera, but every tire has a load rating, a recommended inflation pressure, and then also you have the inflation pressure on the vehicle, which may now not match what's on there now.
Yeah, a lot of times I like to tell people just go to the door sticker. Whatever your door sticker is, that's important. But that only works in factory tire and wheel applications. So if you go to choose an aftermarket wheel or tire, it's very important that you know what your proper inflation rating is going to be, because the number on the door sticker 99% of the time is going to be different than, say, what it says the maximum inflation pressure is on a tire. It's also something I would like to touch on is on the side of your tire next to your aspect ratio and your maximum weight, your weight rating for the tire, it says max PSI. That is the maximum inflation number that you can inflate that tire to safely. That is not what you need to set the tire at. So I just like to tell people that, you see one number on there, oh, this tire says 65 PSI. some people assume. You know what happens when we assume, and running it at its maximum inflation pressure is not ideal.
Yeah, that can be not good for the vehicle and also the tire itself.
Yeah.
Okay, wheel and tire package is picked out, it's spec'd, you figured out the optimal pressure to have it in. Let's talk about TPMS sensors. And as far as, let's talk about the wrong way to do it first, because I'm always good at doing it the wrong way the first time.
Story of my life, man.
Have you ever seen these, I basically call it a TPMS bomb in the back of some of these vehicles where they'll take the 4 TPMS sensors.
With the PVC
Yep.
and that kind of deal?
And then they'll put a Schrader valve on it and fill it up to the correct PSI. That's not the right way to do it.
No, and not only is that not the correct way to do it, but, PVC or any of that is not designed to hold, if your TPMS sensors are rated at 80 PSI, I don't know if I trust, putting 80 PSI in a piece of plumbing pipe. So I don't recommend that. I've seen it. Always giggle about it when you find it in the back of somebody's car, but it is not the correct way and it is not safe. So, yes.
And it's also illegal according to some of the NHTSA out there because you're disabling a critical safety system. The customer can do it, but you can't do it. You may, for some of the older guys out there, remember West Coast Customs when they were putting TV screens in the center of the airbag and taking the airbag out for a custom thing. But if you're disabling the TPMS sensors on a vehicle, you're essentially taking away a critical safety system for the tires. And I think it's up to a $10,000 fine.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, Andrew, but I don't have an extra $10,000 sitting around to find out. So, that's not something you're going to see roll across my shop floor.
So let's talk about doing it the right way.
Yeah, so there's a couple different options for TPMS sensors nowadays.
So you can use a couple different sensors. There are universal sensors that you can install in the wheel and tire package. And typically the hole for the Schrader valve or everything else it's the same for a normal versus.
Yeah, there is different sizes, but there is what I would call like a standard size or one that almost they're all the same. So you just do need to investigate when you're buying your wheels and make sure it's important that you buy the correct valve stems and or TPMS sensors.
This is just an example. I'm going to bring this up here for changing the placard pressure. This is a Bartech tool. Some other tools have it out there and also scan tools, but you can actually go in and change the placard inflation. So if you have that vehicle where it was set at 41 PSI, that's that threshold because 25% overinflation and 25% under will cause that TPMS light to go off. But with this, you can reset the thresholds.
See, that's super cool. So, Summit Racing, we actually just debuted our Ram revamp project. You guys check it out on our YouTube page. You guys are going to like it a lot. It's a lot of fun. But that was one of the things, I put a different wheel and tire package on that truck. And going from factory wheels to those wheels, I don't need 80 PSI. Like, the tires that I put on don't require 80 PSI.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I had to do is reprogram the TPMS sensors in that deal to make sure the light on the dash was not on and, it was reading correctly. So a lot of guys with Jeeps, Toyotas, Broncos, reprogramming the threshold is nice as well because, if you're off-roading the thing, you want to drop your tire pressure to, depending on what kind of wheels you have, down to 15, 10 PSI. Some of those beadlock guys getting down all the way to 8. But it's nice to know that's what your tire pressure is actually at because if the rest are at 8 and I drop one off, that's one goes to 0, I want to know about it. So... But being able to replace, reprogram not only the sensors for PSI and your threshold is very important for all sorts of different applications.
And also I saw Bully Dog has a tuner that can actually adjust the placard inflation and then also the circumference to make sure that your speedometer is working correctly.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's important is tire size and figuring out kind of actually how big your tire is versus just going off on the number on the side because, we had talked like 3% is what we like to keep that threshold in. But if I can make it perfect, that is ideal. Because that's the last thing you want to do is, having the speedo off. You're cruising down the highway. Your truck says you're doing 70. You're really doing 80. And, when you get pulled over, the cop doesn't care.
That 3% rule, I guess it's like if you get caught speeding, it can be 3 to 4 miles an hour over for speedometer discrepancy. And, but I mean, just with, okay, we've got the wheel and tire package, we got the load right, we've got the placard matching now for what's on the vehicle. What other considerations should they have when they're looking at a wheel and tire package? And I guess the question I got is circumference. Is there any way that, someone who's selecting a package should be aware of that 3% roll versus circumference versus the manufacturer specification? What should they be doing to compute that?
So, I personally like to actually measure the tire, and there's actually a little formula you can use to figure out circumference. I believe Andrew has it here for us.
So we promised math. Sorry, students, I hate to do that to you. But this is the equation for it.
Yeah, so we have pi times diameter, and that's going to give you your actual tire size. So say, you want to know if you have a 30-inch tire versus a 30 point, a 30 and a half or a 31. It's, that makes a difference. So you take your number here, you take your actual diameter of the tire, you go times 3.14, or you can go several digits down into pi, it doesn't matter. And that's going to give you your actual circumference of your tire to allow you to figure out what your TPMS sensors are going to be programmed at.
So I never did really well at math myself, but here is to determine the diameter and circumference. I pulled this off online. This is pretty interesting just as far as, you've got your sidewall height, you got your overall width, you got the aspect ratio, and, you're figuring out how tall that sidewall is going to be.
Yeah, and that's a big thing too, is your tire size. Your actual, you're going to want to mount the thing before you go and measure it, because your actual tire size can change slightly once the tire is mounted.
And also look at the specifications on the manufacturer's website, because it can differ quite a bit. I mean, you could have a 205/4017 in a Michelin. It could be a little bit different compared to a Pirelli.
Oh yeah, and I agree. You have to be very conscious about that. So the example I'm going to use is, I don't know if you guys know, I'm a very avid dirt bike rider, and one of the things I do is I replace the tube inside the tire with what they call a nitro mousse, and it's like a run flat for a dirt bike is basically how I describe it. But every different tire I like to run, whether it be a tire in the winter or in the summer, the carcass, it might be a 18 by 110, dirt bike tire, but the inside of the carcass itself is a different size. So you have to get a different size nitro mousse or bib or whatever you want to call it for every different, when the tire changes between manufacturers. So they all might be, a 110 by 18, but the tire itself is different. So same deal with this, as you change different tires, like say I go from Hancooks to Michelin's to a Nitto, they're all going to be different, and it's all important to measure that and correct it in your vehicle per tire change.
True, and the sidewall appearance and everything else, it's definitely sometimes manufacturer specific. So let's get back to, okay, you've got the wheels and tires, they've been delivered to your shop, you're getting ready to mount them up, and you're wondering about the sensor that you'd want to use on that. What are the mounting options on some of the custom wheels? I know it's typically if you have a snap-in sensor like this one to where, sorry about that.
Oh, you're good.
It will mount right here to the...
Yeah, and these ones are super easy to do. You just grab that cool valve stem puller tool, you you lube up your sensor, you slide it through there and pop it right through. Now there's also bolt-in options. Mm-hmm. So you have ones like this where you're going to take it, you have a nut and a seal, you're going to slide it through the wheel, you're going to run it down, you're going to grab that cool little torque wrench there, and then you're going to lock this nut on, and that's going to seal it. They also have banded sensors, which is essentially the sensor itself. You have a conventional valve stem in the tire. You're going to grab your sensor here, and then it has a large, I don't want to call it rubber, but
it's a metal band, yeah.
Yeah, a large band that actually holds it to the wheel here, and that's encapsulated inside the tire. So I prefer what I see in 90% of applications is a conventional sensor like this one we have here, where it's simple. You just go ahead, pull it through, and the sensor is actually mounted to the back of the valve stem.
So move this back in a little bit better focus for Patrick there. So with these systems, okay, you've got now the TPMS sensor mounted in the wheel and tire. You've got the everything mounted up, and now let's say the options for sensors. I mean, there's direct, which is just like the OE. There's a programmable sensor, and there's actually some, I've heard about universal sensors lately.
Yeah, so obviously if your vehicle came, if it's newer than '08 and it came with TPMS sensors, your best bet is to, purchase new or reuse your OEM sensors. So you have a lot of guys that have like winter and summer wheels. So, you run, you'll get two different sets. Every time you get a new set of wheels, you have to buy TPMS sensors. It's kind of, bite the bullet. You don't want to be taking your wheels and breaking them down just to get a valve stem out of it. It doesn't really make much sense in the logistics of it. But with universal sensors, this is like Alltel is kind of like my go-to when it comes to the universal TPMS sensors. They sell them in really cool, convenient kits with their programmers, and they go mild to what you can get a really expensive TPMS programmer, or they have more budget-friendly options.
Yeah.
So you pick up Alltel sells a whole kit with their sensors. You grab it, install those in your wheels, and then you use the Alltel tool to program them. And those will program, that'll allow it to learn your factory signal for your vehicle. Whether it has the screen on some of the newer vehicles that display all 4 tire pressures at the same time, or if you simply just have a tire light. And that's like a big thing, We should probably talk about the growth on where this came from. From a typical flat tire light on the dash where you have to walk around and check all 4 to see which one's actually flat or, low. Versus in some of these new vehicles, like our Summit Racing Jeep, where I just flip through a little control center and it tells me how much pressure's in every tire.
Yeah, that's so there is this type of relearn tool that it actually will ping the sensor with a 125 hertz signal, or even could be 315 or 433 hertz, and then it gets the sensor to transmit. So let's just I'm going to show right now how it looks at the sensor, and this is kind of interesting. We're going to use the banded sensor from the Mustang. Just going to set it up here, and then let's hit the button and see what comes up on the screen. Oh, wait, did I get that? Oh. So, give it a little sec here. So it's able to tell that this sensor is 0 PSI. It's a 315 megahertz sensor, which is typical for domestic type vehicles. And it's 69 degrees at the sensor, which is kind of interesting to think that, this is both doing pressure and temperature.
Well, and that's a big thing. Pressure changes as you heat a tire or cool a tire down. So with that and a great application for the Mustang, some of those cars, a lot of those cars, guys are buying new Mustangs and turning them into track cars. Yeah. So, that's another, not only a safety tool, but you can use that as a tuning aspect in your vehicle. Oh, well, I make a run, I pull off the track, I look at my deal. Well, this tire's really, this tire is really hot. So maybe it needs an increase in pressure because it has too much. That's a learning, that's just as much a safety tool as it is a learning tool.
And, pressure and temperature, I mean, these things were, a lot of these direct sensors, they came from the motorsports world. IndyCar, Formula One, they started to put these in the tires, I want to say, mid-90s?
Yeah, and that's like the cool thing that, we don't ever really talk about is the highest, the most prestigious motorsports in the world. A lot of these, options and technologies that we have on our daily drivers, that's where they start from, anti-lock brakes to, big rowdy like we'd done, an episode on brakes and, carbon ceramic rotors and all that. All that stuff starts in, crazy race programs and then trickles down into domestic vehicles. So same, just like Andrew had said, this started in the highest prestigious motorsport, and now all our daily drivers have these.
So we got the sensors programmed. It's on the vehicle. Read the placard. Good job. Car is spot on. Everything works perfectly. But let's go more into the service side, to where some of the technicians that will have to be out there in the field will be looking at servicing a vehicle with a TPMS light on. It could be after a tire was replaced, the tires were rotated, and what these sensors do for a vehicle. I mean, it's kind of interesting, like most of the radio signals on a vehicle, it's getting pretty noisy lately because you had keyless entry and now you've got TPMS.
Yeah, so you're broadcasting all these radio signals, and you're just wondering in your brain how this stuff isn't getting all jabbled up, and making other systems think they're doing something they're not. So it's quite crazy that they've figured out how to run all this stuff on its own. On the whole spectrum of signals, how they're using different radio signals to make all this stuff work. It's like CAN wiring, just wireless.
And think about this. This thing is transmitting a very low power signal because it can't do. I mean, this TPMS sensor is designed to last over 100,000 miles, a certain amount of cycles, and it transmits when it's applicable to transmit. It's not going to be transmitting when it's sitting in a driveway that's been parked for, let's say 20, 30 minutes.
Oh, and that's another thing is, so like, I'm going to use our Bronco. We did our Bronco build at a Summit for an example, and that was cool because Ford, on a lot of the newer Ford vehicles and some of the Mopar stuff too, you can program this stuff by, certain key sequence, like, you turn the key back and forth and you hit this button 7 times and you spin around in a circle to activate, get it into TPMS mode. And you go around and, at every tire, you sit there, hold it, acknowledge it. When it acknowledges, the car beeps. Then you make your way around the vehicle in a certain order. But oh man, I forgot where I was going with that.
Oh, with the program sequence, yeah, that's why you definitely have to follow. It's like on this tool right here, it walks you around to the different tires on the vehicle. It's like this one is driver left, and then you go driver right. But it could be different. Like Toyota's a little bit different on the sequence. You may start at the right rear, go to the right front. It all depends, and it should be a thing of where you're, looking at the tool to make sure that you're doing
every
the correct
vehicle
sequence.
is different, and you need to use the program sequence that is required by that vehicle manufacturer.
And I learned something from I think it was a gentleman at Continental. He told me how that module sits there. It's actually kind of like a misfire monitor. So let's say you have a sensor out there that's transmitting, and it's going around the rim. It's going around every so often. The antenna on the vehicle isn't going to pick it up every time, or the signal could be garbled. And he was saying that if you had a TPMS light that did it directly connected from the TPMS sensor to the module to the dash, that thing would be flashing like every 5 to 6 seconds because it's not picking up on signals at certain times. So it's sort of like a misfire monitor. So it says, well, I didn't hear from you this time. I'm going to wait for the next time to come around. But with a TPMS sensor, and this is part of the TRED Act and the mandatory thing, is if it loses, I think, how many PSI? It's like 25% of its pressure within like a 10 to 12 second window. This thing is going to be screaming out a signal saying, hey, turn that TPMS light on, and get it flashing in some cases to get the driver's attention. But it's kind of like a misfire because very low signal, very limited range. And let's say, there's a brake caliper over here in the wheel. It could be blocked at that certain time when it's rotating around the wheel assembly.
Yeah, there's certainly, when it comes to, there's a lot going on in the office out here at the wheel. And so for that sensor to be able to, whiz around like it does and get picked up is quite some impressive technology. But Andrew had talked earlier is, that's one of the things to wake these sensors up. You have to move the vehicle sometimes. So you might have the thing sit in a bay overnight in the shop, and you're sitting there. You have to I have to put wheels and tires on this thing, or I have to fix a wheel and tire sensor, and you can't get it to register on your tool. A lot of the times to wake them up, you need to pull the vehicle out of the shop and pull it back. Like it needs a certain amount of movement to do it.
I actually had this going earlier. If any of you students out there are kind of familiar, this is a Flipper Zero. It's kind of been a hacking tool, but it's really an educational tool. Once you start to look at the frequencies on a vehicle, which are typically sub-gigahertz, you could actually like shake the sensor and it would actually come up sometimes just because of the momentum or transmit every so often, which is kind of neat. I mean, people see this as a hacking tool. I mean, a lot of the students will probably recognize this from TikTok for people like turning off lights at places, turning off TVs. But as far as radio frequencies and understanding these as a technician, I mean, if you can understand radio waves, how they work, what happens when it's not working properly or the signal's blocked, it's going to be great for diagnostics for keys, TPMS, and other systems on the vehicle.
Yeah, and that's important. Like this TPMS sensors and keys, anything that uses radio waves is going to be a hard thing to diagnose. And a lot of guys are just going to want to go, we'll just replace all 4 sensors. But with a little bit of know-how and knowledge and a cool little tool like that flipper, you can actually, determine it down to one sensor and replace that just one sensor if you have one bad one.
So let's do a quick little demo here. It's kind of interesting to see how these things work. We'll go back to our wonderful Mustang sensor, the Bandit sensor, and we'll do a side-by-side comparison to look at these radio waves. 2007 band. So we'll take the sensor right here, and then we'll take the flipper and we'll put it right about here, and then I'll hit I think it's that button right there. I think that's the one. So we could see that it picked up the signal on the flipper. It's not kind of a small screen, but it picked it up at 315 hertz. And if we look at the sensor itself, it has a little sticker on here that says 315. So it's kind of a neat thing to understand, the sensors. And some import vehicles actually use 433 or 429. It's all a certain frequency range.
Well, and that's what it's also important. That's one of the things I noticed when we did our Summit Jeep, and there was actually a build date, and for TP they had two different styles of TPMS sensor for 2020. So if you were in the first 6 months, you required this sensor, and you were in the second 6 months, you required this sensor. Well, me being me, I assumed, didn't know that was a thing at the time. Bought the TPMS sensors, installed them in our Jeep, and the thing would lose signal from the body control module all the time. And it'd be like, oh, this thing's got 4 flat tires, this isn't ideal. So do a little investigating, learning. I'm trying to use a TPMS tool to figure it out. I read this information. Oh, well, these sensors, the signal's close, but the signal's not close enough to where it stays connected all the time. So I replaced these sensors, and lo and behold, they have never gave me a fit since, and we haven't had any issues. So knowing and that's a big thing about universal sensors too, is a lot of them say they cover the whole range, and then there's also ones that say they only operate in a certain range. So you need to be conscious of what your vehicle's TPMS sensor, radio frequency is going to be, and buy the corresponding sensors to that. Now, I'll always be an advocate, and I'll be big to push, OEM sensors are the best for your application, but I've had great success with universal sensors as well, so I can't really hate on those.
Got a question that just came in from Richard, and he's wondering, what's the limit for a TPMS sensor in terms of a longer style vehicle? Like a pickup truck, I'm thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I have a quad cab, long bed quad cab truck, and it picks up the TPMS sensors in the back. Now, I don't necessarily think, I don't understand how nobody's brought the technology to the market yet, where there's guys, with a little universal module and TPMS sensors in my camper tires. Maybe that's our $1 million ad.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what me and Andrew are going to retire on. But I would like to think it's in a, from wherever the module is in the vehicle, probably a 20-foot circle.
Yeah. And another thing to think about, the manufacturers are trying to get more and more life out of these sensors so they don't have to be replaced as often. Look at the architecture, the theory and operation thing with a lot of these sensors, because inside the service information, you'll kind of get a feeling for it. Dodge, for example, Dodge Charger, Challenger, that TPMS system, there are 3 antennas dedicated to the TPMS, and then the fourth one is actually the ignition switch that picks up the signal on the driver front. So understanding that architecture of the system, how it energizes it to say, okay, what's my tire pressure when I'm sitting at a stop? A lot of them those antennas will send out that signal. So it says, when you start up the key, it'll send out a signal so you know your pressure immediately. The vehicle doesn't have to be rolling. So that's changing. But, it's like the early GM pickup trucks, probably about 2009, 2010. It was the antenna for the keyless entry system that supplied the information for it took all 4 sensors instead of having an individual antenna for in each corner. So it's knowing the architecture is important too.
Yeah, so it's going to vary on, vehicle to vehicle. But I would say safe rule of thumb, about 20 feet from the steering wheel is how close they're going to be. We'll call it that.
That's true. That's true. question just came in. Can I change the battery inside of a TPMS sensor? Nope.
Nope. It's a one and done thing. So once that sensor dies, it is no more, have a small funeral for it, say your words, part with it, and buy a new one. So yeah, it's a non-serviceable item. So it's not like, the battery in my car goes bad, I replace it and get a new one. Where, it's once the sensor's done, we toss it out and, you buy a new one. So, but that being said, if I have one go bad, and they're about the same age, you kind of have to think with that mindset is, well, if this one just died, how soon are the other 3 or 4 going to die? So if you're going to replace one for a dead battery, like I said, the service life on one of these is about 100,000 miles. So, being vehicles nowadays, you get some stuff up to 200,000 miles is, there's a lot of 200,000 mile vehicles out on the road. So I think, you might see definitely at least 2 sets in a vehicle's lifetime, maybe 3 if you're getting crazy.
So, question came up: should I replace all 4 sensors, or just the one that is not reading?
See, I am going to be the one that says replace all 4 at the same time because that's who I am as a person. And I would get really aggravated if I did this one Monday and I drove the thing for 2 more days or a week or a month, and then that back one goes out. And I'd rather just do all 4 at the same time and just bite the bullet. But that's me. You can do one at a time depending on what your budget's like. But yeah, I'm going to be impatient and I'm just going to do all 4 at the same time because that's who I am.
I mean, they've been on the same vehicle, making the same turns, transmitting the same circuit, and under the same condition. So it makes sense to replace all 4.
Yep. Yeah, you're not going to look at it like this. You're not just going to put one brake pads on one corner of your vehicle when you do them. You're either going to do them per axle or, all 4 at the same time. You're not just going to put one tire on your car. You're going to do all 4 at least a pair or 4 at the same time. That's, something else that's important that we should touch on is with the 3% and a lot of all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive trucks on the road nowadays, is your tires need to be, as crazy as it sounds, you buy all 4 tires, or, if you're buying used tires, because once a tire touches a road, it's already used, to go ahead and measure them to make sure they're within 3% of each other, circumference-wise, or, total diameter-wise. Because the tires in a lot of all-wheel drive vehicles or four-wheel drive trucks, they need to be within 3%. So, Subarus are notorious for it. If I shove 2 brand new tires on the front and have 2 junky tires on the back, it's going to burn out the center diff in that car. And Hondas, they call them viscous couplers. I think in Land Rovers are called viscous couplers as well. But any vehicle that's all-wheel drive or has some kind of transfer case or, transfer area, you need to make sure your tires are all about the same size. Same with limited slip. You can't put 2 back tires that are different sizes, or you're going to, grenade the spider gears out or something.
Michael has a question here. Since what year did the TPMS light have its own relearn?
So I can tell you, the first vehicle to have a TPMS light, and that's actually something really cool, and it's Porsche
959.
Yeah, 959 was the first vehicle with TPMS sensors on it, and they had a bunch of cool stuff on that car. And if you guys don't know about that car, you should really investigate into it and Google, because there was a bunch of sweet stuff that went on with those Porsches, and they were owned by some pretty famous people, and there's a lot of cool, history and laws that go with that, me and Andrew can just nerd out on for hours.
And the neat thing about that, I was just remembering that they had like a little puck that went inside the rim that was the TPMS sensor, and then it would go around and it would generate voltage, and it had like another sensor where it was just how close it went, it would transmit the tire pressure. The bad thing of it was, if you had, I think if the 959 had it, and then later on the 928 had it, is you had to use that wheel if you're going to retain the TPMS thing. And it was like a little bore inside the rim around the drop center. Not much fun.
Yeah, no, but I will say those were cool looking wheels, so I don't know if I'd want to replace that. Those 959s have a very, it's a very notable wheel. If you see it, you know exactly what it is.
But back to Michael's question here. From my history of the TREAD Act, when that was enacted in 2002, it worked with NHTSA, Department of Transportation, and also SAE to decide what the light will do. So if you get into most TPMS systems, you turn on the key, the light will flash once. If the self-diagnostic works, it will go out. And then after that, if it detects a problem, it will still keep flashing for a certain amount of time and then go solid for after 15 to 20 seconds, depending on the manufacturer. If it's a definite issue with a rapid deflation, the light will come on or it will start to flash. In some cases, there used to be two lights for low inflation, and then another one for a total loss of inflation.
Yeah, regardless if there's a light flashing on your dash, you should probably look at it.
And on the relearn thing, service information. I mean, some of them are like this, to where you're going to need a tool to reprogram them. Some of them you go into the menu. But here's the tip for students: if you're getting involved in the world, working at a tire dealer or even a regular shop, these tools are great because you can program the sensor in the bay. A lot of these ones, like let's say for FCA, you're having to program that sensor and it listens for them while you go on a test drive. Leaving the light on and asking the customer to go drive for a while to get the light out may not be the most smart thing to do.
Yeah, no, it depends what atmosphere you're changing. If you're working at Discount Tire, if you're changing tires to the dealership, there's two very, I'd like to say, as a tech, there's different grades of where, what's going to be expected and what's going to, what they're going to want. If you're changing tires on some guy's brand, a newer Challenger, Hellcat, that kind of, they're not going to want to get their car back with a tire light. And so, it's up to you to go drive it. But it's different. It's different for every place you're going to work. But, I recommend giving it back to the customer how you got it, and if the light's off, the light's off. So, but these, like Andrew had said, these tools are indispensable. And when it comes to, being a tire tech.
Because with these, I mean, you're basically, the reason why a lot of them have, and this is Subaru and Honda, you're going to run into some issues where you're going to need to connect to the OBD2 thing. So what you'll do is a set of procedures to where you'll be going around the vehicle, collecting all the IDs from all 4 or 5, don't forget the spare tire, a lot of guys do that, and you'll take those, and they'll be stored in the machine. You connect it to the OBD2 connector, and then it talks to the module for the TPMS, which may be the security type module that does the radio signals, and it will inject and program those 4 sensor IDs into there, so you may not have to go for that test drive.
So, and like you said, it varies between every manufacturer. So it just depends what you're working on in the current moment and being, educated in what that vehicle's TPMS system uses and how it operates.
And Michael, if you want to have fun, try BMW and going through that menu with the stock or the infotainment center and wandering around and trying to find the menu to reset.
I do love that little knob that they have when you have the GPS pulled up on the BMWs. You kind of just like buzz around in it. You're calling in airstrikes at that point, basically.
Oh yeah, the AirDrive is just, it's so impossible to use sometimes if you're not familiar with it. We have another question come in terms of load rating for P-metric radial tires. Is there anything I need to be aware of, or does it really matter for, let's say, a Toyota or a Honda?
So for, I'll be honest, I'm a little confused by his question. It's load rating for a tire is going to matter on no matter what vehicle you're putting these on. But obviously you don't need an E-range loaded or rated tire on the front of a Honda Civic. That's, that's way overkill of a tire. So you're going to want to buy in the load, like I said, on your door sticker on your vehicle, as I like to say, refer to your stock tire size, see what it was rated at, and go from there. Now, if you're shoving in, an aftermarket wheel and you want a performance tire, the whole game changes.
Yeah. And another thing is the future. I mean, we're looking at hybrid vehicles, EV vehicles that may be a little bit heavier than what
yeah, that's a great point to touch on. So something like a Model 3 Tesla, it's the same size as an Accord or a regular size passenger car, but it needs a large load rated tire because the car weighs 40, has a significant amount of weight to it because you have all those batteries in the bottom. So actually what Andrew just, set up on the table for us here is this is an actual EV tire. This is an EV rated tire. So it's your typical 600 tread wear, nothing real crazy. It's a regular looking car tire, but this thing is load rated for substantially higher weight, then I was looking for the load rating sticker on the
It
side.
just says extra load. I think it's a different terminology in some of these tires. Yeah, look at after the Evo AS, it says extra load. I'll put it right about there.
Oh, yep. So extra load. So these tires are actually specifically made for EV applications where you're going to have some more weight. And one of the cool things that me and Andrew were talking about, and I thought was neat. If you guys can see here, it has this foam inside the tire. See my hand? You know, it's squished, nice and squishy. This is to get rid of road noise, because in an EV, you don't have an engine and a transmission, you know, making all this road noise, so you're going to hear a lot more. And one of the things you hear a bunch in those cars are the tires. So they went ahead and added this foam in here to try to quiet this down as much as possible.
Question just came in, more of a comment. Why not just leave the sensors in the tires when you're servicing the wheel assembly? So I think it sounds like, you know, you just leave the sensor as it is, you keep the same position on the vehicle, and you don't service it. Is that a good approach?
Well, see, the problem with that and the flawed theory with that is you should rotate your tires really often. Like, not really often, but I like to rotate mine every time I change the oil, so every 3,000 miles. So by doing that, it'd be essentially, well, I need to dismount this tire off the back, dismount that one, and I'm flipping tires on the same wheels. And that sounds like way too much work. So I'd rather just take, you know, wheel off per corner and rotate them in the proper, you know, order. So that's the nice thing, is it's going to, and most of the time, once 4 sensors are programmed to the vehicle, when you make the location change, 99% of the time it knows the location change. It's not like going and I flip all these tires around and then I need to go sit there and reprogram every TPMS sensor. So with some of these modern systems, it knows in proximity where it is, and it figures it out on its own.
And Jeff, I got a question for you. Would you not replace this if you're doing a regular tire?
That is a really good question. So, and every, you know,
It's the same thing right here.
yeah, same deal. If you're breaking it down, you're going to do it. Now, one of the cool things about these, and I actually don't know if they sell them separately per se, but the sensor itself actually unbolts from the valve stem. So, say you have a valve stem that's messed up on the outside, or you have some issues, you can take your sensor off, bolt it on a new valve stem, and reinstall it. But no one's ever asked me that question. If, you know, every time I, you know, mount and dismount a set of wheels or wheels and tires, I always put 4 fresh, brand new valve stems in it.
Yeah.
Because they cost, you know, 30 cents a piece versus the
$7. I mean, this is cheap insurance, because like the worst thing of it is, you know, let's say you're wrestling the tire on and off, you nail the sensor with the, you know, the sidewall and going into the drop center. It can disturb this little thing down here, and then it could cause a slow leak. And would you want the same valve stem on a car for, you know, let's say 80,000 miles? That would not. It would eventually start to leak. I mean.
Oh yeah, as soon as you get, especially with like aluminum wheels and stuff like that, you get a little bit of corrosion in between like the wheel surface and that. It starts to bubble up, and that's not going to seal anymore.
And this is kind of interesting. This is actually, you were talking about Autel sensors before. This is their solution. I don't have one of their sensors here, but this plugs in and out of the sensor. And if you look, oh my God, there's no hole in it. This thing's not going to fill the tire, but actually it's on the side. But you can exchange this out on the sensor for this, or a regular snap-in type sensor. So another, probably see the flipper, it's just going crazy right now because it's all around these radio signals,
and
it's
waving all these sensors around.
Okay, we just had a question come up. How can you calibrate the speedometer for a brand new wheel and tire package? Is that possible?
So the best way I like to do it, you're going to use an aftermarket, you know, company. So like a great AV makes one for, you know, the Broncos, JLs, JTs, and that's like a Jeep specific one. You can go use your run-of-the-mill, you know, Hypertech makes a bunch of good products from, they have a tool that just does TPMS sensors and speedometer calibration, all the way up into vehicle, you know, ones that'll read your DTC codes, and, you know, you have some aftermarket tuning options there. And There's a lot of any I would like to say aftermarket programmer is kind of the umbrella I'm going to shove all this stuff under. So, from Edge, Bully Dog, SCT, all these guys, the programmers they sell for vehicles, 90% of them have a tire size relearn option. But the other thing about that is not only in some of these you need to relearn your tire size, but if you make a gear change, you're able to change what your gear ratio is, especially like in the Jeep, in the Jeep market. And I always keep referring to that. I'm a big off-road guy, so it's easy for me. But if you make a transfer case gear change, the AEV module that they make for the Jeep allows you to change, do I have a regular transfer case, or say I have a 4-into-1, Rubicon case, or, I did a auxiliary box, or so you're able to change all those different parameters to make sure your speed rating is correct. Because you can reprogram your tire size. Well, if I threw 37s on the truck and I re-geared it and went from a 355 to a 410, well, I can change the tire size and it's still going to be off.
I just remember my early days of being a technician, and it used to be a colored gear that you'd have to buy.
Oh yeah, so that's another thing. If you have an older vehicle, like say I'm going to use something that has like a C6 in it, there's 7 different colors of gear. Or I remember back in the day they had those little there was an adjustable. It was like a little silver box, and it had a knob on it, and then,
Yep.
but you took it, undid your speedo cable, put it in line, and either you went over. You flip it this way and it's overdrive. You flip it the other way and it's an underdrive for the speedo. And then it had a finite adjustment, and that's but that was like crazy, going from stock gears to like a big 40-inch tire or something like that, where you really needed to make a change. I do know in like like the 700 R4 and like Hydromatic, your Turbo 400 applications like that, there's a wear life on those speedo gears. So say you do make a drastic gear change, I know there's a certain size that they're like, oh, this one wears out substantially faster than the others because of how much you've changed the gear pitch and the tooth count and that kind of deal. So that's something to be wary about.
I just remember dropping one of those gears into a transmission, and
It's plastic. It'll munch it up. It'll be fine. I'll dig it out with the next filter change. What's the worst can happen?
So, question just came in from Brendan. It says, is there any consideration that you need to have inside a shop doing relearn procedures as far as radio waves interfering with stuff?
Yeah, so that is another important thing. All these electronic devices that we use nowadays all put off some kind of electrical interference or signals, especially if you're working in a larger shop where, you have 4 or 5 bays that are all next to each other. You're trying to walk around. I said it'll pick it up within 20 feet. You're going to probably want a 20-foot clear circle around that thing when you're trying to program these things, because you're going to be right up in it. So, with your programming tool, you're going to be right next to the tire, programming it, walking around the vehicle. But having another vehicle with TPMS sensors or having some sitting on top of your toolbox, like this stuff puts off a radio signal, and interference could be an issue, but it's generally, I think if you have enough space around your deal and you're right next to the tire, you're not going to have an issue.
And if you even look at this is sort of a telltale sign that we're seeing a bunch of different signals come through. So if you're doing a relearn procedure where you're going tire to tire to tire, and let's say there's a car next to the bay that's transmitting a similar signal with a similar ID, well, then all of a sudden that one is on there. Yeah. It may look great in the bay, then you pull out and all of a sudden the lights up.
If you have 4 techs, I would not recommend, say, you all doing 4, trying to program TPMS sensors at the same time.
And, another thing to consider is just the vehicle itself. I mean, you may have a sensor that's behind a brake caliper or the brake rotor that's interfering with that signal when you're trying to do like a static relearn procedure.
I mean, heck, even your cell phone in your pocket could, add a couple issues.
Yeah, I was just looking. We had a 900 megahertz signal. I think that was my cell phone. But yeah, that's just it's really interesting. The future of technicians out there and understanding radio frequency. I mean, if someone would have told me that 25, 30 years ago, I'd been like, radio frequency? Like the one on the dash?
I mean, look at can wiring. That was never, even being a young technician in my early 20s, can wiring wasn't something that I was dealing with all the time. By the time I was 25, those vehicles had been around with can wiring, but you didn't see issues, and I didn't have to diagnose that stuff until it was later in that vehicle's life. So in that, it's the same deal as these vehicles become more advanced and, technology follows right along with them, you're going to have more radio and electronic controlled devices, more than we already have, which is crazy to think, to the early 80s, you didn't have tire sensors, TBI stuff, that's from the basis, and 30 years later, we have electric vehicles, everything's sensorized. It's wild to think how fast technology's progressed in, say, 30 years. Imagine what this stuff's going to look like in, 2050.
It's absolutely amazing, and we're even seeing that spectrum between 250 megahertz to about 499, which is all the keyless entry, all the TPMS. It's getting very noisy, and we're seeing the first vehicle, Bluetooth TPMS sensors, Tesla.
And
Completely different.
That's cool. I am amazed. See, that stuff like that's wireless CarPlay has been blowing my mind lately. I got a new rental car the other day. I was like, I got to plug it in for my Apple CarPlay to work. I'm glad we're pursuing this technology. Next thing you know, we need to frost the whole Pop-Tart, and then we'll be an icon at that point.
Could you imagine the thing of instead of doing wiring from the front to the rear, you have a module in the rear that would handle, it's all radio signals and that?
I think the technology's there. Well, it's even in the aspect of building race car harnesses and stuff like that. How the mil-spec connectors have became so universal, and you can get your hands on them. So now I can build a harness versus me unplugging all this stuff from my engine, where it's one nice mil-spec plug. You spin the nut off and you unplug it. I think that's I think wireless vehicle sensors could. I don't think we're that far from that technology, honestly.
And Brian, no, I will not steal a car with the Flipper Zero. Thank you for that comment.
The thing about the Flipper, Brian, is it can be used for good and or for evil, and it just depends on who the user is.
Another question came in for the Flipper. Can the Flipper be used to emulate TPMS signals? I think it can, in theory.
Yeah, in theory. So we got it. We can mimic the radio signal. I don't know exactly how we would mimic, how much the signal changes with actual TPMS tire sensor rating. So I think we could get the Flipper to read as this is a zero inflated tire, but I don't know if we could get it to read pressure because it obviously doesn't have a pressure sensor.
So here's my theory. If we took a sensor, installed it in a wheel, or let's say it's a car sitting in a parking lot, and we deflate it rapidly, get it to transmit, capture the signal.
I never even thought about, you just had to pick up the signal of an inflated sensor. See, this is why we hang out. Because it's two, the 5 or 6 brain cells between us really can come up with some fire.
But, just thinking about that, you'd have to only go for that sensor because all 4 sensors on a vehicle have a unique ID.
Yeah, so it's going to be isolating one to try to get it pick it up. So if you wanted to do all 4, you need 4 flippers to do it.
Question from one of the instructors here, it looks like. Have there been any cases where someone has deactivated a TPMS system and face defined? I can't say if they have or not.
It's so had Andrew had stated earlier. Oh, is it? It's 07 or 08 is when these.
Model year 08, so it's September 7th, 2007.
Yeah, so
cars.
08 and up, all this stuff is a standard safety feature. So deleting safety features is very illegal and very frowned upon, and I do not recommend anybody to do it. So make sure your TPMS sensors work correctly.
Hey, everybody, please submit your questions. We got our 5-minute mark here coming up on before we go out. Question here, as far as this is kind of an interesting question. I never thought about it this way. Does decreasing the area of the sidewall increase the inflation pressure required?
So the larger the tire is, the more PSI it's, the PSI might not change, but the volume of air itself changes. So if I'm trying to fill, say I have 2 tires that I need to fill to 35 PSI. One's a, 35 by 12.5 by 15, and the other one's a 245, 75, 15. The 35 is going to take longer to get to 35 PSI because it requires more air. So the smaller the actual inside of the tire is, so the smaller the tire to get to the same pressure is, it's going to be required. It's the same amount of pressure. It's the volume of air that changes.
Which kind of leads into our next question. Why does the TPMS sensor need to know the temperature?
Well, because temperature is going to change, but so if I inflate a tire at 60 degrees to 35 psi, I take that thing, I take it outside, say like right now it's about 30 degrees outside, 35, let it sit for 12 more hours. 12 hours later, that tire pressure is going to be lower because the air itself condenses. So I take it, same deal, if I fill that thing up outside at, say it's 32 degrees, I fill it to 35 psi, I carry it inside the building at 60 degrees, let it sit for an hour or two, the tire pressure is going to be higher than 35 psi. So, and I don't know, I'd be curious on how much, nitrogens became really popular in tires. If it has green valve stem caps, they probably put nitrogen in it. I don't know how nitrogen is affected by temperature like regular air is.
It's supposed to be more stable.
I know it's got a larger molecule.
Yeah.
So they say it doesn't you don't lose it like you can lose air. Because that is from a tire heat cycling and it going from, on a molecular small individual level, you get a tire really hot and getting really cold. That's why you should check your tire pressure all the time because it's going to lose air by, shrinking and getting larger, shrinking and getting larger. It might not be like a 5 psi difference, but on a small level, you do that a bunch of times during the winter, the thing's naturally going to get lower.
Yeah, it's that first cold day at 40 degrees where, what was it? 10 psi, no, 10 degrees equals 1 psi. That's Fahrenheit, not Celsius, in case for Canadian viewers. So that's so critical for people to learn. It's like that first cold day, you see all the people outside the gas station at the air pump trying to get their TPMS light off.
Yes, and just like Andrew said, all my numbers were in bald eagle, not Canada goose.
So one more question coming in here. This is kind of interesting. What TPMS tool do you recommend?
So the two tools Andrew has in front of him are fantastic, and I'd recommend, if you don't have one yet, those are great. They're fantastic. I'm an Autel guy, but the downfall about the Autel is you have to use Autel tire sensors. So depending on kind of what you got going on in your shop, with the two tools he has there, those will program not only OE sensors, but a lot of universal and aftermarket ones as well.
Yeah, there's pretty much the menu for the sensors for the different ones that this can program. And as a side note, if you work at a shop and you have a TPMS tool, always try to perform updates. In the same way with your scan tool, because the updates can update a tool, add new sensor lines to the menu, and add new model coverage, because every year they're making 15 million vehicles.
Man, that is my the least favorite, when your tool guy comes around and it's like, oh, new updates are out. Let's, you're paying a little bit of money to get those new model years, but, it's indispensable. You need it if you're, a new car tech. So you don't want to limit yourself with the range of, you don't want to tell people I can work on vehicles up to year X, whatever, your last update on your scan tool is.
Interesting question. How can you tell if a tire or wheel assembly has a TPMS sensor inside?
So you're not going to be able to tell by, per se, looking at a valve.
This is actually a trick the Schrader folks taught me. So hopefully we're on the same plane here. If you look at the TPMS one, you've got this little collar right here. And you can find this on most TPMS snap-in sensor valve stems. This is a non-TPMS sensor, so it's completely flat down to the rubber part. So this is one way to look at it.
Shut the front door. I did not know that. See, I learned something today.
So if you're scouting around, so you don't need the tool to detect it. It does help. But with these, also the clamp-on style ones, it can be a little bit more difficult because there were, in the late 90s, there were these types of valve stems on vehicles that didn't have TPMS. And another rule, the banded sensors on Ford, which you may run across in the field, these things actually last a long time. But, it's 180 degrees from there. So that was a good question, how to identify.
Yeah, that's like I said, you taught me something new, and that's like I said, you learn something new every day. But that's you're gonna go with the safe bet. If it's '08 or newer, it's guaranteed to have tire pressure sensors.
Well, Justin, we're at the end of our hour.
Man, this has been a fun one.
I'd like to thank everybody who attended this. Keep your questions coming, even though if you're not watching it live, please ask a question. We'll have our eyes on that and answer some questions. Anything you'd like to add, Justin?
No, like I said, it's been a really good time talking to you guys about wheel and tire packages and TPMS sensors. I even learned something today, so that was fun. So you guys are out there that are aspiring to be techs and or techs in the field, just keep at it, man.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you, Summit Racing, for sponsoring this.
Yeah, we always appreciate you having us on.
Excellent.
So, see you guys later.